Welcome to Veritas Group's webinar, Do I Really Need to Qualify My Donors? Today's webinar features Jeff Schreifels, Senior Partner of Veritas Group, and Lisa Robertson, our Director of Client Services. Together, they have decades of experience in fundraising and have worked with hundreds of leaders and gift officers throughout the world. They'll be talking to you about our qualification process, which is one of the main principles of the Veritas Way. Welcome, Jeff and Lisa.
Hey, thanks, Karen. Lisa, it's great to be with you. I gotta say, Lisa, I loved how Karen said, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need a major to qualify donors. Do we really need to do it? Yeah, we do. But we'll get into that. All right, so I'm Jeff Schreifels, and I'm principal at Veritas Group, and I've been working in the nonprofit sector for over 30 years. And have worked as a development director for several nonprofits. And in my career, I've had the opportunity to work with nonprofits to build strategic and meaningful fundraising and marketing programs. And I've been able to dive deep into the data of hundreds of nonprofits to really see and understand the problems many organizations are facing. We are really excited to be with you today.
Thanks. And I'm Lisa Robertson. I am the Director of Client Services with Veritas Group. I've been here 9 years now, just last week. But I love working on our trainings, love working with clients, and definitely love our processes. So really happy to be here with you, Jeff.
This is going to be fun.
Yes,
now, before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to share a bit about who we are at Veritas. Some of you on the call may be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, we're passionately donor-centered and grounded in a data-driven approach. This dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and planned giving programs. Something that Richard and I recognized during our time in the direct response world is that data is powerful. So when we found that most major gift programs were missing this critical piece, we knew it had to be an important part of our approach at Veritas. So over the last several years, we've had the opportunity to grow with work with thousands of major gift officers, mid-level officers, and plan giving officers, many on a weekly basis through our consulting work. So we know firsthand how this approach has helped organizations of all sizes and focuses create authentic donor relationships that lead to a stronger donor pipeline and greater net revenue. The lack of data that we found was really shocking, and it still amazes us how many nonprofits do not adequately consider the data piece of this work. And that's why we've worked so hard to ground our approach in objective fact, not just our personal opinion. We formed our recommendations through insight from analysis of millions of donor records and work with thousands of fundraisers and leaders. And we've gotten to work with some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years who have helped us learn and develop our strategy and our approach. Now that we've introduced ourselves and shared a little bit about Veritas Group, I wanted to let you know that if you stay until the end of this webinar, we're going to give you our introduction call structure so that you can use it as you get started in your own qualification process.
Yeah. I love that thing, by the way. Yeah. So to answer Karen's question, we answered it briefly. We'll dive into it. But yes, we really do need to qualify our donors. And what do we mean by that? Well, it's a process we have that we'll show you where we really want to discover which donors want to connect with us relationally. And then how can we really transform how they want to engage with us, right? So we hear stories all the time that when we start working with a new client, how they've been really trying to reach a particular donor for just months or maybe even years and gotten no response. So we really do believe it's important that in order to create these meaningful relationships, you have to have this relationship with your donors, and that creates the impact on your mission. And to do that, you have to qualify them. They have to be qualified to be in your caseload. So here's our promise. We love our promises around here. If you follow this advice, we're going to help you break down some of those barriers and those obstacles so that you'll stop you from creating a caseload of donors who truly want to engage with you and go deeper with you. We're really confident in making that statement because we've seen it work with, like Jeff said, hundreds of nonprofit fundraisers and leaders, and we know the power of this process. We know that but it causes some trepidation. So there's some misconceptions. So let's address some of those. We're asking in the title of the webinar, like, whether or not you really need to do this. So Jeff?
Yeah. So now
Misconception.
you can probably guess that we believe that you do need to qualify your donors, but here's why. So many fundraisers that we've worked with, and probably many of you on this call, have caseloads full of unqualified donors, which is causing you to waste time trying to get in contact with them who don't want to engage. So approaching your caseload this way is very costly to your organization. It makes your job a whole lot less enjoyable and is going to bring in less net revenue for your organization. Now, we know that there are some organizations and leaders out there who insist that you can't remove donors from your caseload, or that they must keep that wealthy philanthropist even though they've never given, or that gift alone, that one gift, qualifies a donor to a caseload. We have a lot of great resources and blogs on these topics that will encourage you to explore if this is something you're struggling with at your organization.
Yeah, I have a great illustration about that, Jeff. When we started working with an organization a few years ago, it was a large national health organization, and the MGO had about 200 people on our caseload, which we would say is too many, and it was raising about $300,000. But when we started our relationship, one of the first things we do is we say, who do you have a relationship with? Who's qualified? And when we did that, it was reduced to about 50 people. But she was reluctant to let go of that other 150. And I get that, right? She's been trying to engage them. She's been trying to find ways to connect. And so she didn't want to remove them quite yet. And I could really sense that she was fearful. And that's totally understandable, because there's a fear that donors are going to go away, right? We're going to lose them. Yeah. But in reality, we never really had them.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I asked her, and I told her, actually what I said to her was, listen, because of that fear, you're not killing anyone. You're not pushing them off a cliff here, right? So it's okay. Let's just try this process. And so I asked her just to trust me, to try this and engage them, report back to my impact, try different ways of engaging that she hadn't tried before. And then what happened was, after about 4 months, she started to really see success. And then pretty soon she'd call me and she'd just say, Geronimo, like push him off the cliff. I've tried the cliff. I just got my Alabama in. They would not connect, and she'd say, you know, I tried this. You're right. I've got better people. And so what happened is she started to really enjoy her job. She enjoyed connecting. She started to be able to report on impact. And she was joking, of course, about pushing them off a cliff, but she was ready to release them and concentrate on them. And now, actually, she has a qualified caseload that went up to initially 500,000 in about 18 months. And she just called me this week, Jeff, and she's up to 650.
That's
so
awesome.
That's in like less than 3 years. Yeah, we're really excited for her.
So now she has less donors and a whole lot more revenue in her program, because she's able to focus on the right donors, donors that want to relate to her.
Yeah.
So very simply, our goal in the donor qualification cycle is to build trust and ask donors to show that they want a personal relationship with the organization. In each step, you're working to show the donor that you care about their passions and interests, you want to know how to communicate with them in their preferred manner, and that you are not just after their money.
Yeah, and there's really 2 reasons why we qualify donors. It's a twofold objectives, which is we want, you want to have a strong engaged relationship with the donor, right? Which is one part of the purpose of qualifying. And then the other part is that you ultimately need to raise the revenue for organization. So in every caseload, you'll have donors that need to move out of major gifts for a variety of reasons, but there'll be new donors who begin to give at that level and have an interest in a deeper relationship. And so there's this natural movement on a caseload that's really critical to raise more revenue for your mission. And also, more importantly, so you can honor where your donors are and have that kind of relationship that they're interested in.
Yeah, so we want to set some realistic expectations here. The qualification process is not easy. It takes a lot of work and time to do properly, but we believe the result is well worth it. On average, we generally find that 1 in 3 donors will say yes to a deeper level of engagement. In major donors, our target caseload for a full-time MGO is 150 donors. So if you're using the 1 to 3 ratio, that means you need a qualification pool of 450 donors to reach 150. So This ratio may look a little different for you though. We've had some clients who are qualifying rapidly and are more at a 1-and-2 ratio, and others who have a slower process. There's a lot that can impact the process from the size of your donor pool, the actual makeup of these donors, and if there's been a broken trust in the past. But we want to set the expectation right at the start because there's a good amount of rejection in this process. And you'll hear a lot of silence and some no's as you work through your caseload pool. But I want to encourage you to see that that is actually a gift. What you're learning is important information about the kind of relationship that the donor wants, which will help you stay focused on the donors that do want to engage.
Yeah, I think that's so important to share, right? That 60% of people won't respond right away. And that's something we address about the speed of qualification, that really there's a couple of things that can impact it. And one of them might be relative to the organization, its mission, its program development, or its giving levels. So giving an example, Jeff, which is we worked with one organization and they were building their major gift program. So they really hadn't been reaching out at all. And so donors were kind of slow to respond. They kind of didn't know what to expect from the MGOs.
Right.
With another, they have a mission that is incredibly personal and kind of emergent. And so the organizations, and they've always done personal phone calls, so the donors would reply and pick up a lot more quickly. They were kind of used to it. And then with another organization, the donors were level about 5 to 10,000. Again, they're kind of more used to phone calls. They picked up at a higher rate. And then another organization, we had to drop to 750, not so much, not so fast. So really there's a lot of variables there.
Yeah.
So another misconception, and Jeff, you alluded to this earlier, but some of you on the webinar today have been thinking, but I have to keep all these donors, right? I have to. And we encounter that all the time. So we really want, we really do understand that pressure that you might be feeling. And there are a lot of nonprofits out there that have tasked their MGOs with prospecting or managing donors who just, they shouldn't be in a major gift program at all. And we feel pretty strongly about the approach is extremely damaging to your organization.
Now let me jump in here for a moment to share just a little bit about our perspective about prospecting and speak to any leaders who might be on this call. In our approach, we absolutely recommend against prospecting or hanging on to donors just because they gave like 10,000 3 years ago. It's causing MGOs to be completely overworked and pulls their focus from the donors who want to engage. And this is just one aspect that drives the high turnover we've all experienced, a problem that's only been worsened over the last year.
Yeah, I'm glad you jumped in because that's a really important point, because all the trends right now suggest that we're in the middle of a mass transition period, not just in the nonprofit sector where people are looking for new positions, right? So if we're looking internally at the systems we have that make it harder and less enjoyable for people to do their jobs, that's really critical.
Yeah. So both fundraisers and nonprofit leaders need to keep the goal of qualifying in mind, which is to find the donors who are already in your database that want to engage meaningfully. When we work with organizations, we often hear leaders expressing how donor-centered the organization is. And they think they are, but the reality is that they're treating donors like ATMs. And this is evident when we look at caseloads and find all these donors who haven't given in years. They're not responsive to the MGO, or they haven't given at all. So let's just back up for a moment to how we've arrived at the idea that your goal is to find the donors in your database who want to relate to you. At Veritas, the data side of what we do is very important, and it drives a lot of the strategies and systems we use. Specifically, the economics of major gifts is something we're passionate about teaching because it's so often an aspect of training that leaders and fundraisers don't get. The first layer of understanding the economics of major gifts and why you need to qualify your donors is that a caseload has a dual purpose: to both raise funds and fulfill the donor's passions and interests. This ultimately means that every donor in your major gift caseload must deliver net revenue for the organization. Now, we'll go into this more in a moment. Now, another layer is that when you have a qualified caseload of donors, the quality of that caseload increases over time while value and donor attrition decrease. If you can see in this illustration, we start with a caseload of 150 donors giving 800,000. Over time, some of those donors from the original 150 move off the caseload, while others move on. And the overall
Mhm.
revenue, though, increases to 1.8 million by year 4. This kind of growth and trends are difficult, if not impossible to achieve when your caseload is unqualified and when you aren't approaching your caseload with the economics in mind.
Yeah, I love that. And when we think about the economics of a caseload, we look at both sides, right? The cost and the
Yeah.
revenue. So on this slide, we're looking at the cost. And so you can see that we're the amount of an MGO is about $150,000. And that means for a caseload of 150 donors, the cost per unit is $1,000 per donor. And on the flip side of that, we'll look at the revenue side. This is for an actual fully qualified caseload. So this is at the end goal of qualifying, right? I've got my 150 donors, but it illustrates why that's so important. You'll see that the total number of donors in 3 tiers is up to 150 and the total raised is 1.5 million, which means the average revenue per donor is about 10,000. We're going to put that all together and you see how in the 3 tiers that we like to talk about, tier A, which is showing up here on the left, then tier B and then C has different costs, revenue, and net. And that's because tier A donors are going to be giving the largest gifts, which means you should be spending the majority of your time with them. But the key here is, as it relates to qualification, is that all of these tiers show a net revenue. And that means they are giving more revenue than it's costing the organization to have you manage the donor relationship. If you had a donor who was giving $0 in the last 2 years or who had never given a gift to your organization, then your net is negative.
Yeah.
And if you've been working tirelessly, right, to try to connect to a $2,000 donor with little or no response, then maybe you're putting in too much time for that relationship.
Exactly. The bottom line here is that you only have so much time, and you cannot have meaningful relationships when you have a caseload of 500 donors, or when you're trying to engage and motivate gifts from a list of 50 prospects that someone at your organization deemed as a major gift potential. When you subtract out holidays and weekends, you're working with a small amount of time each month to do your work.
Yeah.
And that time needs to be focused on creating the most impact for your organization and connecting authentically with your donors to help them fulfill their passions and interests. Now, if you've been listening so far and you're thinking to yourself, there is no way I have time for this, we want you to know that we understand. One, this process is a lot of work, like I said before, but it's work you need to do because it will pay off so significantly for you and your organization in the end.
So this is the donor qualification cycle, and we designed the cycle pulling from some of the best practices in the sales world, which typically recommends 7 to 9 touches to get a prospect to engage. Yeah. Each step in the cycle is meant to provide a different way of trying to engage and connect, assuming we have some of those ways of getting a hold of them. We're trying to learn more then about their communication preference, their interests, and the first step is that introduction letter, which introduces you to the donor's point of contact or as their point of contact and lets the donor know that you'll be reaching out again to connect.
Now, hold on, Lisa. So what do you recommend if an MGO has had a person on their caseload, decided the donor isn't qualified, and is moving the donor through this process? What do they do?
Yeah, that's a great question because that happens a lot. It kind of depends on how much interaction you've had with the donor. So if you've never engaged with the donor, you can kind of treat them like a new donor on your caseload and do the standard introduction, but you can alter the letter and speak a little bit more to your role or mention that even though they might have heard from you in the past, that you're wanting to connect and see how you can better communicate with them, right? So you just change it a little bit. And then the next step to that is you follow up to the letter. And we recommend in that follow-up, you do a mix of phone calls and emails if you have access to that information. But the main point is here that you're making multiple attempts, maybe different times of the day, that sort of thing. If you don't hear back from them, then you do another touch point, follow-up touch point with a personal note. If you have an idea of what the donor might be interested in, then you can tailor that touch point to that. If not, then this is an opportunity to see if they respond to that particular touch point topic. And emails are great for this touch point because we can ask a question and then hopefully get a response.
Yep.
After that, if there's no response or connection, then we recommend what we call a non-responder letter and survey to help you learn more about the donor. And it's really important that that questionnaire stays really focused on just a few key questions and not become like this massive survey covering a lot of areas. So we typically like to ask just a few questions to learn more about their program interests, their communication preference, and update their contact information. So if you've learned in prior steps that you're missing a phone or an email or had a bad one, then this is a great spot to kind of call that out to the donor and ask them to update it. And then similar to that introduction letter, we're going to try to do some follow-up attempts. If you still haven't heard from them, you're going to do another touch point and try to motivate a response. And if you're still trying to learn their passion and interest, you may want to try a different program touch point to see if the donor responds to that one instead. And then the cycle ends with a final note that essentially states, like, I've been trying to get a hold of you and I'm available to you if you need anything. It's a signal to you and to the donor that you're ending this kind of direct outreach, but you're still there for them if they decide to engage more deeply with the organization.
Okay, so Lisa, I know we recommend 7 touch points, but we've also had some situations where additional touch points are needed. Can you speak to how that might come up?
Yeah, this is where you can take our general recommendation and adjust it for you and the organization. So like I worked with one organization, she worked with a ton of snowbirds. So her qualification period happened to fall during a period where most of the individuals would not be in her state. So she added some additional touch points when they'd be back in the wintertime. Or, you know, when you have high net worth donors, you're not the only one who knows their high net worth. And so everyone's trying to get a hold of them. And so it might be good to try a few extra touch points that are kind of unique so that you can maybe distinguish ourselves.
Okay. So the pace for qualification does build as you continue in the process. We often refer to it as a bell curve because you're trying to build to this peak and then it will start to slow as you get closer to a full caseload. We often hear from fundraisers who are feeling the intensity of that top part of the bell curve, but you just have to keep at it. And remember, once you do the qualification process once, you won't have to do that full process ever again.
Right. So here's an idea of how that pacing works. The first week, you start by sending out about 20 introduction letters. And then things continue to build because those 20 move from step 1 to another step. And as you add more groups each week, well, then you reach a point where it feels like you have donors in every stage of qualification. But then that quickly passes as you kind of get in a rhythm, you qualify more donors to your caseload. And the key here is always the follow-up. We want to keep our word with the donor, right? So if this becomes delayed, it's just better to like not send letters for a week and catch up on calls. Yeah. So finally, after about 6 to 8 months, you'll hit your target of 150 donors in your caseload. And after that point, like you said, Jeff, you don't need to qualify during the year, maybe for small groups as you kind of get natural transitions, new people on your caseload.
Yeah.
So the timing we recommend is on the screen. That's what we recommend for every step of this process. And it's important to keep just that regular pace. That way you don't get overwhelmed or behind on the process. And at any point in this process, a donor can move to your caseload and then they don't get the rest of the touches. You'll see in here that we have attempts in the timeline for every one of the follow-ups, as well as to make sure that you're planning all of those.
Exactly. Good stuff. So let me ask you, if we offered you an opportunity to learn specifically how to complete the qualification process, create the components and manage the overall pace, plus much more on overall caseload strategy and management, would you be interested? I'm looking here. There's a lot of you raising your hands right now. Well, good. That's good, because our next offering for the certification course for major gift fundraisers and fundraising leaders starts on June 6th. And these courses have it all. And we'll provide a comprehensive training on the system and structure you can implement to not just create a qualified caseload, but then to manage your caseload and create meaningful relationships with donors in a really effective way. And of course, our fundraising leaders give you all the tools and resources you need to successfully manage your major gift program and support the fundraisers on your team.
Right. For fundraisers who are thinking of joining us on June 6th, you'll learn how to communicate with your donors meaningfully and authentically, how to create a caseload of donors who want to engage with you, and you'll continue to grow your caseload. You'll also get a deeper training on that qualification process we talked about today, as well as the specific components that are part of the process. So when you join our recommended course for leaders, if you do that one, then you'll learn how to support your team by creating more effective processes. You'll get more information on the economics of major gifts, and you'll get valuable tools to help keep your team accountable to all these processes.
You know, it's kind of crazy what people can spend on different training programs out there. Back in the day, when everyone was going to conferences, the travel expenses alone could run into the thousands. When we looked at different programs out there and what it would cost to get all the bits and pieces to be successful, we found it could easily add up to almost $17,000. And that's one of the reasons we created our certification course for major gift fundraisers and fundraising leaders. We know how hard it is to find all the information you need and get it in a way that you can actually use. In these courses, you get an incredible learning experience that includes a multimedia training approach, live peer group discussion calls, tons of resources, all of our top tools, and so much more. Plus, you'll earn 36 CFRE credits when you complete the course, which is a pretty great bonus. We decided to run these courses concurrently because we know the value in getting everyone on your team on the same page. And the best part is that you can get $17,000 worth of training material, which includes 10 hours of recorded media, over 500 pages of reading and resources, 4 hours of live calls, and our top tools and those 36 CFR credits for only $1,997. Now, on top of that, we're offering participants on this call $200 off the price of the course if they can sign up by Friday, May 20th. And here's a note from a Veritas Group Academy alumna about the value of this organization and how it helped her raise more money for her organization. Basically, what Suzanne is saying is that even when she is so busy and overwhelmed, the skills that she learned through our course helped her stay on track to manage relationships and allow her to step back and remind herself again why her organization is so important to donors. So if you're looking to grow your major gift program or take your work with donors to the next level, this is really a course you don't want to miss. And if you want to get the $200 off for your upcoming course, which starts June 6th, go to veritasgroup.com/courses, select certification courses for major gift fundraisers or certification course for major managers and executives, and use coupon code JuneMG200 on the registration page.
I love our courses. So to summarize what we talked about today, if you commit to building a caseload of donors who want to engage, you need a system and a structure to help you identify the right donors, have the support of your organization's leadership to remove unqualified donors and prospects, and see the value of investing this time.
That's right. And remember, as a thank you to all of you who have stuck with us and stayed until this point, we'll be emailing you a copy of our intro call structure to help you with that important second step of the qualification process.
Awesome. We've got a lot of great questions here in the question box. And those of you who are just wondering and thinking, go ahead and pop yours in because we've got some great time here to take questions. I'm excited. So let's start here with Lorraine's question. This is for you, Lisa. Is the cycle shorter if you already have a relationship with them? Example, they haven't been properly qualified but have been engaged in the past, or they've stopped donating?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the whole adjust as needed. And so a lot of times they've engaged with the past, but maybe we don't know their passion or interest. And so, you know, our name is Veritas. I believe in being really honest. And so I might suggest you say, Lorraine, something like, hey, Karen, I know we've been talking, or I've talked to you before. I realize I haven't really asked about your interest or passion. And that kind of just starts a conversation. Or even say, you know, I'm really making an effort to learn our donors' passions and interests. I'd love to learn yours, because then it kind of normalizes it for that donor. Like, okay, she's not picking on me. She's talking to everybody about this. So yeah, I would just adjust a little bit.
Great, thank you. And what about if they've stopped giving? That was part of Lorraine's question as well.
Well, yeah, that's a tough one. And the reason I'm hesitating is because we have a really great fundraiser who has some donors that have stopped giving because they gave to a capital campaign years ago. Like, we're talking $250,000, and then no one's talked to them in 5 years. So I think there's an opportunity to re-engage them and even say something like, hey, you know, Jeff, don't say hey. I always say that when we're talking. That doesn't go in letters. But, you know, Jeff, you know, I realize you gave to our project 5 years ago. I'd love to learn more about what prompted that and how we can really engage you now and tell you what we're doing there. And so you kind of restart the conversation with that person. So it depends on the amount, I think, and what you know about them, and if you don't know why they disengaged, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. We've got a question here for you, Jeff, from Jonathan. you talk about qualifying 150. What if I'm not a full-time MGO and I'm also doing a lot of other things, more like a DOD position?
That's a great question.
Mhm.
So as we have alluded to, a full-time MGO can handle 150 donors. If you're in a position where you're also doing, you're the executive director and you're the fundraiser, you really have to first figure out how much of your time can you devote to major gifts.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to make this up. Let's say it's only 10% or 20%. 20% of 150 is what? 30 donors. That's all you can handle. If you can only do 20% of your time, then you can have a caseload of 30 donors. And you got to tier those donors too, because you got to focus your time correctly. But that's how I would do it. But it's very difficult when you have multiple things that you're doing besides major gifts. So you have to be extra disciplined to hold yourself to that time. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself doing those other things and not actually getting to the major gift side.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Caitlin, I'm going to ask you to go back. We've got some questions about some different slides. So Caitlin, if you can go back to the slide that has all the touch points in that line with the different color dots, that's slide 25. Let's see when we get there. Lisa will tell you when you're there. Keep going back.
Keep going.
Keep going back. Keep going back. Oh, we got to go through each of the spots.
I feel like we should be talking backwards.
We'll be there. Okay,
There
okay, you're
One
almost
more.
there. Almost there.
One
Keep
more,
going.
I think.
There
There
you
you
go.
go. Perfect.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, Lisa, a lot of questions about this, really. So Aurora says, how do we approach the intro touch points if a donor has already been in your caseload for months or years, assuming they have already been in communications with you at some point? It's odd to introduce. You'd mentioned this, but talk a little bit more about what you would say if you know, are they qualified if they've already had communications with you? Let's talk about that.
No, they might be. So in that example, when I walked in and there were 200 donors on her portfolio, I said to her, which ones do you actually have a relationship with? Like if you reached out and said, hey, it's me, they would be like, what? Who? You know, they know you and they're expecting to hear from you. That's what you start with. And then those other 150, some of them might, but you know, a lot of times what happens is when I hear, and this is what happened in that case, I've been reaching out and then I say, well, tell me what you've done. They say, well, I sent them our newsletter 4 times a year. Well, there's no call to action there. So that donor might have loved that. They might have been neutral to that. They might have been like, what are you doing? Who knows? Because we've never asked. So this is a totally different approach. And that's where, you know, if it kind of depends on how long it's been since you've had contact, what kind of contact. But again, I really am a big proponent of calling things out and just saying, you've heard from me in the past. I'm really emphasizing and want to learn more about our donors. This is, you know, I'd love to connect with you, because then it's all about them, right? You're saying like, I'm owning this. I haven't asked this. You're important to me and I really value your input.
And
You
this
know,
is
one of the
also
things we do, I want to add to that, Lisa, because you didn't mention this yet. You kind of did. But when we work with our, you know, when we first start working with a major gift officer, we do what we call a gut check. And we go through every one of the donors that are in their portfolio. And we say, okay, tell me how you know this donor. Tell me the interactions you've had. And through that process, we find out, okay, are they qualified or not? And let's say they have 300 donors. Let's just say, well, 50 of those 300 donors are qualified. Okay, that means 100 are not, which means we need a pool of 300 to get to the next 100 of donors to actually qualify. So there might be people in your portfolio that are qualified, but you have to go through this gut check and really decide, do I have a relationship? Do they want to hear from me? Do I interact with them at all? And then go from there to figure out who's qualified, who's not.
Yeah, you know what else I didn't add, Jeff, is sometimes you know them, they're qualified, but the giving's not at a good level. That's the other thing we've got to look at, right? So yeah, when we do that gut check, we do look at both of those things.
Yep.
Fantastic. And I'll add one more thing is that, you know, you're qualifying because you're going to be doing a whole system and structure that we also teach in this course. That is our 12-month plan for each donor. So if you've known somebody, maybe you haven't really been doing that level of planning and follow up around their passions and interests. And so in that intro letter, that's what you're speaking to, right? You know, what you're going to be starting to do and how that's going to be different. Shannon's asking, do you have examples of the intro letter on your website? We do. I will put in the chat box our qualification white paper that has a lot of great stuff in there for you. And of course, we're going to really dive into this in the course. So Lisa, basically, what are you doing in that intro letter quickly? And then we'll move on to the next question.
Short and simple is my motto. I'm saying I'm your personal contact here. I'll be following up. I'd love to know what, you know, what prompted your gift and, you know, or what your connection is, some kind of question that calls them out. And so it's I mean, that's 3 words, 3 sentences. It's usually 3 paragraphs, but it's
right.
Oh, definitely. I'm sorry. I always do the thank you sandwich. I always say, you know, thank you so much. I'm your personal contact. I'll be reaching out, you know, and that kind of thing. So it's really, here's the other thing I say about this process. This is just the first part. So going back to what you said, Karen, about the 12-month plan, that in this part, introduction and qualification, this is discovery. I'm still trying to discover who my donors are that want to connect, what their passions are. And then I'm going to continue that process of discovery because we're building a relationship, right? This is not, if I'm using a dating analogy, I'm not asking them to marry me in this intro letter. I am just trying to get their digits. And then I'm moving on. I'm developing more and more because it's all about relationship. It's all about the people.
Yep.
Awesome. I have, let's see here. Jeff, what if I'm getting a caseload from a prior staff member that has been reached out to but not totally qualified? From Katie.
Yeah, well, that's where you need to send out that introduction letter, introducing you as their new contact. And what's great about new people is that they can use that new person card with their donors. Like, I'm sending out this letter. I would love to follow up with a phone call. I'm new, and I would love to find out why you care so much about our organization. I've seen that you've been giving for a long time, so you kind of show that, okay, they've done some research on me, the donor, but I really want to connect with you personally because I'm new and I want to make that connection.
Yeah.
Here's a great question, Lisa, from Robin. Give me an example of the wording that would be used for downgrading, and we'll talk about the downgrading word, a major donor to a mid-level donor. In my organization's process, this involves a donor being assigned to another gift officer. Great question, Robin.
Yes, we get that question a lot, and it is a great question. And as Karen alluded to, that's one of my little soapboxes because our pipeline is horizontal, right? So we're moving people where they belong in the pipeline, and there's no up or down. We still value these donors, but I get it. I get why we use that language. But the language we use in the letter might have to do with location. So sometimes it's, you know, I have a peer who specializes in donors in Michigan, and I'd love to introduce you to Susie, right? You know, it's just that simple introduction. So as long as it's a warm handoff, the language should be one of, I'm introducing you to my peer, who I think is going to take really great care of you. Because they don't know major gift and mid-level. They don't care.
Right. Yeah.
We forget they're not in our world, right? Jeff, Lynn asks, how do we use this framework to get board members to engage with donors?
How do you use this to get the board member to engage with donors? This is actually really great for board members to get them to engage because it's a process and you're giving them see, board members are like, I don't know what to do. Well, you're giving them this whole structure for them to actually do the work. In fact, you could kind of look at your board members in a sense as major gift officers themselves, where they actually have to go through this process. And in fact, I've used this with organizations who use their board members to do major gifts. And it's the same thing. So the development director then is holding the board member accountable to this process. But the board members love it because they know exactly what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it. And then they have that accountability piece where the development director is checking in on them, making sure that they're actually doing what they said they were going to do.
So Jeff, to that point, like if the board isn't doing the fundraising, they could probably also help with some of that introduction process, right? Like
totally.
Hey, right, Jeff said, or Jeff is going to set up the meeting so I can meet them. Yeah. So really help with that first part of discovery is good too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Cool. On the touch points, Lisa, you mentioned them, but talk a little bit more about what those are. And then Lynn was asking, can you give me examples of a final touch point? Like, how do you do the, I'm leaving you forever final touch point?
Leave me. Yes. So yes, sometimes it depends on the time of year. So what I encourage fundraisers I'm working with to do is look at where you are in the qualification stage and find something that's meaningful into the donor at that point, right? So if it was now and I'm working with someone with the Cancer Society, it's like sunscreen month, right? So it's melanoma month. I would maybe send an email about melanoma and protection and say, like, what do you use for sunscreen? I use Banana Boat because I learned that as a kid from a lifeguard. Or what are you doing this summer? And how are you gonna stay safe from the sun? Any kind of question like that. So that's why I love emails for this touch point, because you can ask a question that's gonna get a response. If you don't have an email, then you might have to send a card, but I'd still put a note on there that would say something like, I'd love to send this by email, but I don't seem to have a personal email for you to connect with. So that kind of timing, or something that's sort of evergreen from your organization that the donor wouldn't have gotten yet that shows their impact. So if you have something, even now, even though it's May, if you said it was what we did in 2021, you could say, hey, Jeff, thanks again for your support. I wanted you to see your impact. This is the kind of thing I'll be sending you on a regular basis to show you that. So that kind of thing. So that was touch points based on timing, evergreen. What was the other one? Oh, final note. So that, again, is really simple. It could be a handwritten note that simply says, Karen, I've been trying to connect with you. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance yet. Here's my information if you ever need to reach out to me. And it sounds like that's sort of like a death knell, and like, who's going to respond to that? But people actually do. They finally go, oh gosh, I've got that letter sitting here from 6 months ago or 3 months ago. I should probably write to them. And so it really actually is effective.
Those handwritten notes are amazing. People will open a handwritten note. Why? Because in our mail today, all we get is either junk mail or bills or stuff that we don't use.
Yeah.
To get a handwritten note with your name on it in a stamp is gold. It will get open.
Yeah. Yep.
So Jeff, question here from Jerry. Why 150 qualified donors, and how much time do you recommend with each level?
Each level. You mean the tier levels?
Tier, I would assume, yeah. Let us know, Jerry, if it's not
Why
tiering.
150? Because we have found over the years of all this work time that a 150 is actually pretty much as many as one person can handle correctly if they tier those donors. And then how much time? We would say that you need to spend half of your time with your A-level donors. And the reason for that is if you break out your A, B, and C level, and A is probably between 20 and 25 donors, that is going to equal roughly half of the value of the total caseload. It almost happens every time. The top 25 of your 150 is bringing in half of the total value of a caseload. So if your value of your caseload is $1 million, your top 25 donors are giving $500,000. So obviously that is where you're going to want to spend more of your time. Why? Because it's more complex and you're getting much more net revenue from those donors. And then, I would say 35% of the rest of your time with Bs and then 15% with your C level. So that's how I would break it out.
Awesome. We've got many more great questions. Caitlin, if you'll go back to 2 slides after where you were with the whole schedule, the detailed schedule, we'll get to that in just a minute. This is fun. So Jeff, a quick question I put into the chat box about our free donor assessment. I just wanted to ask you quickly to offer what that's about and how that might benefit folks in figuring out like how many caseloads they have and how many NGOs and all that.
Yeah. So where we start always with an organization is looking at data, because data tells us how well your program is performing. And it also gives us clues on where there's an area of opportunity to improve on. And it also allows us eventually to do a 5-year revenue forecast. But what it comes down to is we want to look at essentially all your donors who have given $1,000 cum in any one of the last 4 years. Because what we want to look at is donor behavior. And what we want to find out is, what is your donor attrition and donor value attrition rates? Because that really tells us the strength of your program. And then there's all kinds of other information that we find, but that is the bulk of it. And it's incredibly eye-opening to the organizations that we do this for. And over the years, we've done hundreds of these assessments, and they're powerful because while most CEOs and development directors think their major gift program is doing just fine, or, if we're growing, what they find out is that a lot of donors are either going away or they're giving less each year, and they don't know it because new donors come in and mask the behavior of the old donors. And so all they look at is bottom line numbers. Hey, well, we grew 10% this year, not knowing that they lost $1 million due to value attrition from the donors who gave the previous year. And so this is quite eye-opening. And so what we do is we'd love to do an assessment on your file, because it will tell you so much information about how your donors are behaving and what you can do to turn it around to actually get your major gift program growing substantially more than it is today.
Yep.
Thank you. So that link is in the chat box. So check that and get more information about that. We've got some questions here, Lisa, about the timeline. And I want to remind you that you're not like just doing this thing for 8 months and then you start fundraising. It's like all of this is great relationship building and touch points, and this may be more than they've ever gotten from the organization in any meaningful way. So it's building relationships the whole time. So talk a little bit about what this means on here, Lisa. Like, what does it mean by days after attempt 1 and attempt 2, and how do people toggle between phone calls and emails? Like, what are they saying in those phone calls?
That's a really great question. So I think we talked earlier, like the important part is follow up, right? Because in that letter we say, I'll be following up. So we want to make sure to do that. So the reason we space these out like this is if we're sending a letter, we want to call, hopefully after it's in the house, they've gotten it. So we can say, I'm following up on my letter. I'd love to talk to you about it. And then if they don't answer that time on the phone, we leave a message. The second time we suggest calling again and not leaving a message, because most of us have smartphones that keep a number logged in, they'll know it. And one thing we found that's really effective is to immediately then email and say, I tried to get a hold of you. I left a message, last week, I'll try again. Or maybe this is easier, so maybe they'll respond to that. And then try again a few days later. Now, this all depends on kind of where it falls in the week. We don't suggest calling on a Monday. We definitely love Thursday nights. They're very, people are good at, but then trying different times and days, because we all have different lives, right? So try not to make your story the donor story, because I've had people say, well, I only want to call from 8 to 4. Okay, that's your working hours.
Yeah.
They're also at work, and they give to you personally. So that's why we kind of mix that up. And then the reason we sort of spaced out the other way, Karen, is just to make sure there's this kind of steady time of us talking to them, because by that point, then now we recommend on the introduction letter, if it's appropriate, put your photo or some kind of photo that's personal, and then they're going to hear so they'll see you, they've seen your name, now they've heard your voice, they've got an email from you. It starts to just sort of build in them, kind of like Pinocchio. You're always in front of their face, and it just starts to build this relationship. And it's the weirdest thing where I've had people where they don't get a response from anyone, and then they see them at an event and they go, oh, Karen, I've gotten your cards, and they're giving them hugs, and the fundraiser is like, you never replied to me. So yes, it's a cycle. And the other thing I'll say is, even though we're talking about qualification today, in the course you'll learn about making this plan. And what's the fun part of this is when you have qualified donors and you're still filling up your caseload. So now you're toggling a little bit of each. And so that's why it's so important to stay really organized. And that's why we really love our tools for staying organized like that.
Jeff, another great question from Jerry. Does your MGO attempt to get a face-to-face with all 150 donors that are qualified? How many appointments does your MGO have per year?
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to get in front of all of those donors. obviously you're trying harder on your A and B level donors, but if you have the ability to get in front face to face with a donor, you're going to do that. I mean, that's part of the work. And so, yeah, you're always trying to get in front of the donor if that's what they want, right? Because that's part of the process. You're trying to figure out, how does the donor want to be communicated with? Some of those donors don't want face to face. They'd rather have a phone call or an email or text. That's the key, is finding out how they want to be related to. And so, but always, you know, the donors that do want that, yeah, you want to be in front of them.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Like, I have a story about that. I was fundraising here in Texas, and he'd be like, well, Lisa, I called, I talked to him for about a half hour, but he does not want me to come out, so he's not qualified. I'd be like, what, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
No, he doesn't want you driving 9 hours across the state of Texas, but he does want to talk to you. Yeah, so definitely want to pay attention to what the donor wants. Yep.
Great, thank you. Rachel's asking, Lisa, can you talk about how to organize portfolios between multiple MGOs, like geographic versus interest area, et cetera?
Ooh, interest area would be interesting.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. Jeff might have strong opinions about this. I feel double-minded because I understand the geography because it makes it easy for thank yous. It makes it easy for travel when we were traveling. But you can also get yourself into a bind where suddenly you've got, like, I've got one organization, they definitely cut the country up into pieces, and I get that, but I could literally fill a caseload from California and Arizona with this MGO. And then I've got not enough in the middle of the country. So I'm like, well, what about all the Western states? Do we just forget about them? So there is a way to start and kind of look where the pockets are if you want a regionally based MGO who's going to travel in that region. So
I mean,
I
it
don't
really
know.
depends on how big you are as an organization. And do you have
Yeah.
donors that fill up and make sense to have a regional type of situation? A lot of organizations aren't big enough to be able to do that. And, you know, we've seen where we have one MGO and they're traveling all over the country because they don't have just hundreds and hundreds of major gift off or major donors. So if it makes sense though, yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
but I like starting with where the donors are instead of saying, hey, we want to cut the country in 3.
Well, that's the other thing about the assessment that we do. We see that. We see that information. Where do those donors live? And you can do psychographic, you know, information on all of that and find out, wow, we have enough donors that we could have a MGO in the West, East, North, and South, and have different geographic and abilities there. So it really depends on what the data says.
Yep.
So similarly, Greg says, starting with Jeff this time, we travel to meet our donors. How does that factor into caseload management volume? If I have 150 qualified donors, I don't. I'd never be able to meet with them all on an annual basis for effective caseload management. Do you have numbers, information for what a total number of qualified donors would be when monthly travel, let's say one trip for 3 to 5 days, is involved?
I mean, this is where the tiering thing comes into place. And so always your A level. So when you're traveling, the way I would look at it, and Lisa, you can chime in on this, but you're traveling, you're trying to figure out, depending on how many days you're doing this, you want anchor visits. These are the A level donors. And then you're looking at the rest of your portfolio on B level and C level in that area. Can you get those in between the anchor appointments? And then even in some cases, you're even going down lower into mid-level sometimes. If you're in an area and you have a number of donors that you're seeing, but you still have time to visit, that's where you can reach out to mid-level donors at the same time to, you know, if you're in an area, use your time as much as you can. But 150, you may not be able to reach all 150, or they may not all want to see you face to face. So keep that in mind. But especially on your A level, you definitely want to see all of them in the year.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right, Jeff. But that's the other reason, like, it's good to stay organized, right? So if you're going to travel once a month, that's where it helps to have a plan. So you know what you're planning to do in the next month,
Right.
the next 6 weeks, the next 8 weeks, and or why we recommend administrative support so that you can say, hey, I need help because I'm going on the road and next month I'm trying to do this for my touch points. Can you help me get that together? But we definitely recommend sweeping. And, you know, I've got a great story about that where we had a fundraiser who he swept and he goes, I'm really sorry. I made an appointment with the C-level donor. They only give $1,000, but I already told my come. And I was like, go for it. Like, we never know, we're going to learn. And this donor had no capacity, and the fundraiser pulled in and he had 6 Calistoga wagons. Like, those things are worth about 50 grand each, like covered wagons from, like, they were in his front yard. So,
I'm
and
like,
then they
what is
connected
this
on
Calistoga? You Texas girl, what is this?
Calistoga, right?
What is
Calistoga
that?
wagons, stuff called? Someone correct me. They're covered wagons. They had covered
Like,
wagons, but they're like, yeah,
wagon?
yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. Like historical. And so they connected on that, and suddenly the donor, like within a year, was giving 25,000. So this low capacity C-level donor, we just discovered a lot. So the reason I like those sweep visits is because I feel like we never know what we're going to learn about our donors, and our brains are stronger than the prospect research computer sometimes.
Definitely.
Well, interesting you said that, because I have a question next. Lisa, can you talk more about how you sort the data to identify the tiers for use cube giving, wealth rating? Sarah wants to know. How do you tier people?
Well, I love that question because I like to call tiering an artistic science. So we might initially start with what we know about their giving and their capacity. And then the tiers are always mobile, by the way. So the more you learn, you might find things. So I might look at Jeff and he says, yeah, I'd love to talk to you. And he's giving 50 grand a year. And I'm like, great, my A donor. And then Jeff's like, listen, just send me something in December and tell me about your gala in November. And I'll be like, I don't have to invest a lot of time to get an ROI from Jeff. So I'm gonna make him a B donor because I talked to Karen and I thought she was only B-level donor because she was giving that $1,000, but now I've been to her house and she has these covered wagons whose name I can't remember. And she has way more capacity. So I'm going to bump her up to an A and see if by spending more time with Karen. So start with what you know and then adjust, but it's kind of a little bit of a science. And the number one thing I look at is what have they given recently? Because that will tell you so much about their capacity. And then I look at how long they've been giving, how much they've connected with me, the capacity, all those things.
Yeah.
Quickly, final question from Angela. Jeff, do you have suggestions on tools you used and how to get to know your donors better?
Tools. Yes. Phone, mail, email, text, which I use my phone,
Surveys.
surveys, events,
Videos.
videos. Yeah, all kinds of things.
Yep. Cool. Good question. All right. Final words of wisdom. Let's go to the next slide here. Let's see what else we got on here, Caitlin. We got to close this out. Wonderful. Anything else you want to add that we've missed from the two of you, Jeff and Lisa?
Well, just, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I was gonna say the other thing I love about this course is that you do learn how to ask some really great questions and how to have those conversations. So yeah, I do love this course. I just love all the tools that we offer, and that's one of them.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell from the questions that people are really hungry for good strategy and the answers. And we had an hour, but believe me, this course, because hundreds and hundreds of people have gone through this particular course, and the reviews are amazing. They're learning so much. So if you're wanting to go deeper, this is the course for you to learn about how to do this work well. So thanks for being on with us, and hope to see you soon again.
Yes, thank you for being with us today. As a reminder, you'll receive a recording of this webinar and the intro call structure later today. To register for our upcoming session of the certification course for major gift fundraisers and for fundraising leaders, visit us at www.veritasgroup.com/courses and use that code JuneMG200 at checkout to get $200 off when you sign up. And we want to do this by next Friday to really do that. And as always, we're available to assist you in any questions you have at academy@veritasgroup.com. We hope to see you in the course soon. We've got wonderful live calls and conversations just like this. Thank you, Lisa and Jeff. This was fantastic. I'm getting great comments from folks that really enjoyed the webinar. So thank you all, and have a great day.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.